They said they'd be back in an hour. I believed them. I waited outside the bakery with a paper bag full of muffins and a plastic cup of coffee growing colder in my hand. I watched the cars pass by one after another, none of them slowing down. No messages, no missed calls, no footsteps coming back. In that moment, on a roadside bench outside a quiet little town, I realized something that hit harder than I expected. I was alone. Not just for now, maybe for good. We had planned the road trip for weeks. Joel said it would be simple. A long weekend, a chance to see the coast again before the rainy season set in. He offered to drive. Marissa said she'd find the rentals. I just had to pack food and bring my old maps, something about making it feel like the way it used to be when Joel was a boy. And I would navigate from the passenger seat circle roadside diners in Pen Hum along to the radio. I baked banana bread, made sandwiches, even wrapped the silverware in paper napkins. I folded Joel's sweatshirt the way he liked it and brought Marissa the tea she always claimed helped her sleep on long rides. I wasn't just tagging along. I was part of it. We stopped in a town I used to love, small, tucked between hills, with one street that held a bakery I hadn't seen in years. Joel pulled into the lot, said he and Marissa wanted to stretch their legs, grab gas, and come back to pick me up. They told me to grab something sweet, said they'd be gone an hour tops. That was at 10:47 in the morning. I remember because I looked at the bakery clock. It was shaped like a cinnamon roll and always 5 minutes fast. I sat on the bench outside with 2 bags, one for each of them. I watched people come and go. I waited. By noon, the muffin bag had wilted. My phone, the one Joel upgraded for me, showed no signal. I didn't have my wallet, no keys, no card, just a half cup of coffee and a rising feeling in my chest that I didn't know how to name. By 2, the bakery owner asked if I was all right. I nodded, said they'd be back soon, but they didn't come back. Tell me, have you ever sat somewhere too long until the place starts to feel like a witness to something unspoken? That's what that bench became. Not just a seat, a sign, a moment that split before and after, and I still remember the sound of every car that wasn't theirs. I stayed in that town until dusk. The bakery closed early. The streets emptied fast once the sun dipped behind the hills. I sat on the bench until the shadows stretched long and cold across the sidewalk. When I stood up, I could feel the weight in my knees. That weight only comes when you've waited too long for someone who's not coming back. I walked to the edge of town toward the gas station Joel had mentioned. No sign of the car, no note, nothing. The attendant let me use the payphone out back. I called a number I still remembered by heart. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Eventually, a man filling his truck offered to point me toward the nearest bus stop, said the Nightline might get me part of the way. I thanked him and walked there, slow, the straps of my bag cutting into my shoulder. The bus was old, the seats stiff. I paid in cash using the few small bills I had tucked in the side pocket of my jacket. The driver didn't speak. Neither did the woman sitting behind me or the teenager with headphones up front. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel restful. It just sat there, heavy and still. We made 3 stops that night. At each one, I looked out the window, half hoping to see someone I knew. At the second stop, I tried to nap. Curled against the window, my jacket baldled behind my head. That's when the memory came back. Joel had been 5. He had a fever that wouldn't break. We stayed up all night together. I remember the way he clung to my wrist while I placed the cold cloth on his forehead. I sang softly over and over, even when I lost my voice. That night, I didn't sleep. I just watched him breathe. Every slow rise of his chest felt like proof that I was doing something right. Sitting on that bus, I remembered that version of him, the boy who once whispered that he didn't want anyone else but me. By the time the bus pulled into the next town, it was past midnight. I got out and sat on a metal bench outside a closed hardware store. It was colder now. I wrapped my arms around myself and pulled my hood up. The street was empty. It's strange how the memory of someone small and warm in your arms can sit beside the reality of being alone on a freezing street and still feel connected. I didn't cry. I just sat still, waiting for the next bus, wondering when exactly he stopped needing me and how I never noticed it happening. By the time I reached my street, the sky had turned a soft gray. My feet were sore. My back ached from the ride. But more than anything, it was the kind of tired that went beyond the body, the kind that settles into your bones. I stepped up to the porch and tried the front door, locked. I reached into my coat pocket, out of habit, knowing the keys weren't there. I hadn't carried them in months. Joel had offered to take care of all the household things, said I didn't need to worry about carrying keys or remembering codes. At the time, it had felt like kindness. I knocked once, then again, nothing. I sent a message, then another. The screen stayed still. No typing bubbles, no reply. The porch light clicked off automatically. That was new. Another setting Joel must have changed. I sat down on the bench by the window, same spot where I used to rest while waiting for grocery deliveries. It still had the cushion I sewed 2 winters ago. The one Marissa said didn't match the siding. I waited there hoping to hear the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, the engine that used to mean someone was home. The hours passed. I checked my phone again. No response. It was getting cold. I wrapped my coat tighter, pulled my hood up, and leaned against the wooden frame. My stomach was empty, but I didn't feel hunger, just a hollow quiet. By nightfall, I gave up knocking. At some point, I must have drifted into sleep because the creak of the porch woke me. It was Laya, my neighbor from next door. She had lived alone since her husband passed. We weren't close, not in the way people tell each other everything, but we had shared enough cups of tea and swapped enough stories at the mailbox for her to notice when something was wrong. She stood there in her robe and house slippers, holding a flashlight and a frown. She didn't ask what happened. She just said, "I look cold." I followed her inside. Her place smelled like lemon balm and wood polish. She handed me a blanket and poured tea without a word. I sat at her kitchen table, fingers curled around the warm mug. Later that night, I tried Joel again. Still no reply. I stared at the screen, rereading my own words. They looked strange now, like a voice echoing into a space that no longer existed. That night, I slept on Ila's couch, not because I wanted to, because I had nowhere else to go. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to be outside of your own life. Not visiting, not passing through, just locked out quietly entirely. Lily's FaceTime call came unexpectedly late one evening. Her small face filled the screen, eyes bright, so but trembling with something I couldn't quite place. She held the phone with both hands as if it were fragile enough to slip away. Her voice was quiet, breaking through the silence between us. She told me things no child should have to say, that they didn't want anyone to see me anymore. That Mom said I wasn't capable, that I couldn't handle the money. Her words landed softly, but they cut deeper than any shouted insult. The truth was no longer whispered behind closed doors. It was now spoken through a child's tears. I held the phone tight, unable to offer more than a nod, though she couldn't see it. Lily's tears mirrored the ones had long swallowed the ones that never found a voice. Her innocence was stolen, shaped by the harsh words of her parents. That night, after the call, I stared at the ceiling, the darkness wrapping around me like a heavy cloak. The shadows reminded me of the countless nights I spent nursing Joel when he was sick as a boy, his small body fighting pneumonia. Back then, I was his protector, his anchor, in a world that often felt too big and cold. Now that world had shifted and the roles had reversed. I was the one left vulnerable, isolated by those I had trusted most. The next day, I discovered the envelope on my doorstep. It was thick and official-looking, stamped with the county's seal. Inside was paperwork, legal documents, declaring me mentally incapacitated, a claim that left me breathless. Joel's name was on it as the petitioner supported by Marissa's signature. They were moving to take control of everything, starting with my assets. I sat on the worn wooden floor and traced the edges of the papers. The handwriting was neat, practiced cold. The words spoke of assessments and declarations designed to strip away my independence. I felt the ground shift beneath me, a house of cards built on betrayal. The woman next door, Leah, noticed the change in me. She came over with a plate of homemade bread. No questions asked, just company. Her quiet presence was a balm to the raw ache inside. She didn't pretend to have answers. She simply sat beside me, letting me know I was not alone. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter 1, where I realized that the fight was not just about money or a house. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and the right to be seen as more than an obstacle to be removed. The battle ahead was daunting, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't dared hope for: determination. The next morning, I stood in front of a filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in over a decade. It sat in the back corner of the garage, dusty, and dented its drawers stiff with age. That's where Bill kept everything: our mortgage documents, insurance forms, and tucked somewhere inside the last copy of his will. I pulled each drawer carefully, flipping through yellowed pages, brittle folders with labels I had written long before Joel met Marissa. Finally, in the back of the bottom drawer, I found it. A manila envelope with Bill's handwriting across the front, my name and the date he had signed it 13 years ago. Inside were the original documents. The will was clear. In the event of his death, I would retain sole control of the house and our savings. Only upon my passing would Joel inherit anything. There was a clause that protected me from any transfer or override without my written consent. I ran my fingers over Bill's signature. His pen always leaned slightly to the right, even when he was nervous. I remembered the day we signed those papers. We had just come back from the hospital after his second heart scare. He wanted to be sure things were in order. Back then, I didn't want to talk about it. But now that document was all I had left between me and the people who wanted me erased. Later that afternoon, I brought the envelope to the office of Leonard Hill, the same attorney who had helped Bill draft the will. The sign out front was faded, and the waiting room hadn't changed much since I'd last been there. Leonard was older now, but sharp. He looked through the pages carefully, then leaned back in his chair. He told me something I wasn't expecting. A few months ago, Joel had contacted the office asking for a copy of the original will. Said he was helping me get organized, claimed I had lost the originals. Leonard refused to release it without my consent, but Joel had managed to get a scanned draft from a shared folder Bill once created for emergency backups. Joel had taken that version and tried to file a request to revise it. According to Leonard, the courts hadn't finalized anything. No approval, no certified changes. It was still pending, waiting on a competency hearing. That explained the paperwork I had found in the envelope on my doorstep. Joel had been building his case not with confrontation, but with quiet strategic moves behind the scenes. I sat with Leonard for another hour. We discussed options. He recommended creating a new legal wall, one that would hold, even against a blood relative. I nodded. I was ready. That night, I placed the original will in a new fireproof box beside my bed. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't send any messages. I let the silence hold. Because now I knew something they didn't. I wasn't broken. I was preparing. I took a cab across town to meet Carol Simmons. We hadn't spoken in years. She used to be our neighbor, then our accountant, then the woman who brought over fresh peach cobbler when Bill died. After she retired, she moved to a quieter part of town. I knew she'd understand what needed to be done. She welcomed me without hesitation. Her home was filled with paper file boxes and the soft smell of lavender soap. We sat at her dining table, 2 mugs of tea between us, and I explained everything. Joel, the forged documents, the petition to declare me mentally unfit, and the quiet ways he and Marissa were trying to move my life around without asking. Carol didn't flinch. She nodded slowly, then walked to a cabinet and returned with a thin binder. Inside was a blueprint for a personal protection trust, not one of those flashy estate tools for millionaires. This was different, private legal, and fully within my rights. With her help, we began the paperwork. We listed the house first, then the savings, then the small pension I still received from my years working at the community college. Every line of the form made my hands shake a little less. The trust wouldn't belong to Joel, wouldn't belong to any family member. It would be held and protected under the name of the Pierce Living Foundation. A name Carol came up with, half in jest, half out of respect for what I had endured. She said it sounded like a name no one would question. I agreed. Carol became the trustee. I remained the primary beneficiary. There would be no inheritance rights, no default succession. It was a clean legal wall, one that could not be broken without my consent or death, and even then it was shielded. We filed the paperwork the next morning. I returned home just before lunch. Joel and Marissa were out. The house was quiet. I made myself a sandwich, swept the kitchen floor, and moved my old photo albums from the living room to my closet. No one noticed. I didn't announce what I had done. I didn't hint or warn or leave a folder on the kitchen table. Silence had always been their weapon. I figured it could be mine too. That night, Joel mentioned something about paperwork taking longer than expected. I nodded. Marissa brought up the lawyer again, asked if I'd be open to signing a few things to make things easier. I smiled and excused myself. I lay in bed, the fireproof box at my feet, and stared at the ceiling. The house no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a chessboard, one where I had just moved my queen. And for once, they didn't even realize I was still playing. The envelope came on a Thursday morning, left on the hallway table next to the mail. Marissa must have placed it there before heading out. It was cream-colored, thick with a gold border pressed around the edges, formal, performative. Inside was a card printed in cursive. Joel and Marissa were hosting a private dinner at the house, a thank-you gathering, in honor of my grace and cooperation. It read like a public relations statement, not a message to a mother. They wanted to celebrate what they called a transition done with maturity and respect. At the bottom, in smaller print, it listed the expected dress code and asked for discretion. A line that struck me more than all the others. Not a celebration then, a curtain call, one they believed I had no lines left in. I folded the card and placed it in the drawer by my bedside next to a copy of the trust documents and the handwritten notes Carol had helped me prepare. Not out of spite, just as insurance proof. I accepted the invitation not because I wanted to be there, but because silence, when used right, can change the room louder than any voice. In the days that followed, I remained still. I continued the small routines. I swept the hallway. I watered the front planter. I greeted Marissa when she passed, though she barely looked up from her phone. Joel came home late most evenings, talking softly on calls in the garage. I didn't ask. I didn't interfere. I didn't need to. On the morning of the dinner, I ironed one of my older dresses, a dark navy one, simple but clean. I brushed my hair, put on the small pearl earrings Bill had given me on our 25th anniversary. They weren't fancy, but they were mine. The dining room had been rearranged, new tablecloth, rented glassware candles in the corner. Joel greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marissa was busy directing the caterer. She didn't say hello. There were 7 guests, all family friends I hadn't seen in years, neighbors, a few of Joel's colleagues, people who probably didn't know what this night was meant to seal. Dinner moved quickly. Toasts were short. Joel stood at the head of the table and spoke about growth, family legacy. Marissa added a note of gratitude for the ease of this past year. Their words polished the surface, but I heard the subtext clearly. You stepped aside. You accepted your place. I raised my glass when expected. I smiled when someone looked my way, but I didn't speak. Not yet, because I hadn't come to be polite. I had come to be remembered, and I had brought more than gratitude. In my purse, beneath a folded napkin, rested a copy of the amendment clause from Bill's original will, the one Joel never thought I kept, the one that said any heir who isolated or manipulated the grantor for personal gain would be permanently disqualified from inheritance. And tonight, that truth would no longer be hidden. The dining room buzzed with low voices and wine glasses clinking softly. The chandelier flickered above, casting warm gold across the polished table. Joel stood near the head, half smiling as he adjusted the cuffs of his shirt. Marissa paced beside the kitchen door, whispering to a server. Guests were starting to relax, their small talk flowing more freely with each course. I sat in the middle of the long table, not quite at the head, not quite at the foot, right where they wanted me present, but silent, decorative. Joel lifted his glass. The room quieted. He began with practiced charm, thanking everyone for coming, speaking about transitions and legacy. He used words like gratitude and resilience wrapped in careful formality. Then, with a nod toward me, he said it had been a challenging but graceful year, that the family was grateful for my trust and for the peaceful handling of the estate. He raised his glass. To dignity, he said to family. Marissa joined in. She praised how I had accepted the changes, said it was a gift to the next generation. Her voice softened in that way she used when trying to appear thoughtful. I smiled and lifted my glass, then placed it back down without drinking. The string quartet in the corner paused between songs. That was my moment. I reached into my purse and took out a folded page. The room noticed. A few heads tilted. Joel's expression shifted just slightly. I cleared my throat gently. My voice didn't shake. I thanked them for the dinner, for the effort, for the gathering. Then I said I had brought something to read aloud, just one paragraph from a document they may have forgotten existed. Joel stiffened but didn't interrupt. I unfolded the paper slowly. It was a copy of the amendment clause from Bill's original will. I read clearly, each word placed like a stone. Any beneficiary found to have used coercion, isolation, or undue influence toward the grantor shall forfeit all rights to inheritance or property benefit, effective immediately and without contest. The words hung in the air longer than the silence that followed. I folded the paper again, tucked it back into my purse, and looked down at my plate. Joel didn't speak. Marissa opened her mouth, then closed it. No one moved for a long moment. Even the servers paused. Then the music resumed, too soft to matter. I excused myself quietly, left the table without ceremony. In the hallway, I looked back once. Joel was staring at his wine glass. Marissa was already whispering into her phone, but the guests sat still, unsure of what they had just witnessed. It wasn't a scene. It was a line being drawn clean, legal, unshakable. Not for drama. For record. The morning after the dinner, I sat in my room while the house stayed unusually quiet. No footsteps, no music. Even the refrigerator hummed with more caution. I had expected confrontation, or at least a knock on my door, but nothing came. The silence was their answer, and that in itself said everything. I opened my closet and pulled out the old storage bin where I kept family photographs. Most were organized in albums, some in envelopes I had meant to sort for years but never did. The scent of old paper filled the air as I opened the box and flipped through the pages. There were pictures of Joel as a child, his first school play, his graduation vacation, where we all wore the same matching sweatshirts he used to hate. There were photos of Bill, always in the background, always with a hand resting on someone's shoulder. But after a certain point, Joel's photos stopped. No birthdays past his 30th, no pictures from his wedding, nothing from the birth of Lily. All those events had been on their terms, on their cameras, never shared back with me. The absence wasn't dramatic, just gradual, a quiet phasing out like being cropped out of a life you once carried. That afternoon, Lily came to find me. She walked in without knocking, clutching a crumpled piece of notebook paper and her favorite green hoodie. Her face was flushed, eyes wide like they had been the night she first called me from her tablet. She didn't say much, just wrapped her arms around my waist and held tight. I sat down on the edge of the bed, and she climbed up beside me, knees pulled to her chest. After a while, she whispered, "You're my real family." I didn't correct her. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. I reached under the bed and pulled out one of the photo albums, the heavy brown one with the gold stitching. I opened to a page with pictures of my garden Bill in his flannel jacket and a younger version of me holding a basket of pears. I gave the album to Lily, told her she could keep it. She flipped through the pages, slowly running her fingers across each image. She stopped at one of Joel, maybe 8 years old, grinning at a picnic table with chocolate on his chin. She smiled but didn't linger. She turned to a page where Bill and I were dancing at a neighbor's wedding. She asked if I missed him. I said yes. She didn't ask if I missed Joel. She already knew. That evening, I placed a small box by the door of Lily's room. Inside was a second album, one that told the story of a life before everything was measured in legal papers and invitations laced with manipulation. She would grow up with proof, not of the people who tried to erase me, but of the woman who chose not to disappear. Joel and Marissa returned 3 days later. They came in through the back entrance keys, jangling voices low. I was already packed by then. The house was quieter than usual, not because it had emptied out, but because it had finally stopped pretending to be a home. I stayed in my room while they moved through the kitchen and the hallway, their steps sharper, quicker. I heard a drawer open and close, then another, then silence. The kind that comes when something no longer adds up. They had waited too long. Everything of mine had already been sorted. The closet was bare except for a hanger and an empty shoebox. My journals, books, and photo albums were gone. The dishes I brought from my mother's house were boxed and picked up 2 mornings ago by a secondhand shop. The piano I hadn't played in years was sold to a local church. Each room that once held something of me now held only space. At noon, Joel knocked. Not hard, just once. He asked if I was up for a conversation. I told him I was heading out. I didn't offer details. He didn't ask for any. He stood in the doorway looking for something to hold on to. Maybe an apology. Maybe a reversal. Instead, I gave him the folded envelope that Carol had prepared. Inside was the confirmation from the county and the trust office, a legal summary of the full asset transfer, the house, the savings, the insurance benefits, all secured under the Pierce Living Foundation. His name wasn't on anything anymore. He read the first few lines, then stopped. The color in his face shifted. He swallowed hard but didn't speak. Marissa joined him in the hallway, holding her phone. Her eyes scanned the page over his shoulder, then turned toward me. No one raised their voice. That would have required too much feeling. Instead, she said it was fine. Said it was good that everything was in order. Said they were just glad it was all settled. I nodded. Then I picked up my suitcase. Leah waited outside with her small blue car already running. We had agreed days earlier that when it was time, we wouldn't linger. No speeches, no scenes. I stepped out, closed the door behind me, and walked to the car without turning back. Through the front window, I saw Joel still standing by the hallway mirror. Marissa's phone lit up in her hand. No one followed me. The ride to the coast was quiet. The sun was starting to lower when we reached the small house I had rented. A single-story place with wind chimes, white siding, and no shared walls. The kind of quiet that didn't ache. That night, I unpacked the last box and made tea in my mother's old kettle. The furniture was mismatched. The floor creaked, but every inch belonged to me. And for the first time in a long while, the silence inside the room felt earned. It was my birthday. I woke with the sound of the ocean brushing against the shore and the faint creak of the wind chime above my porch. The calendar on the wall showed the date in clear, steady ink. I had circled it weeks ago, not out of anticipation, but to remind myself that I could still claim something for myself. No one called, no messages, no cards, not even one of those automated emails with a discount coupon. And somehow, that was all right. I brewed coffee slowly. The smell filled the kitchen and drifted into the living room. Outside, gulls moved across the gray sky. The weather was cool, steady. I opened the window a crack and let the salt air in. Leah arrived around 10 carrying a brown paper bag tied with twine. Inside were homemade sugar cookies and a paperback novel about a woman who started over at 70. No balloons, no candles, just presents. We didn't say much. She placed the cookies on the counter, poured herself tea, and sat down at the little table by the window. I joined her with a quiet smile. We listened to a cassette of old jazz, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but makes the room feel more alive. Later, I pulled a thin stack of papers from a drawer. It was the beginning of something I had written weeks ago. Not a memoir, not exactly more a letter in chapters notes, to the woman I had been before all of it. Before the silence, before the forced forgetting. The title was written in pencil on the first page. I am not invisible. Leela read a few lines, nodded, and placed her hand gently over mine. We didn't need to say anything. The words had already done their work. That afternoon, we walked along the bluff behind the cottages, the sea to our left, the sky soft with late light. I didn't feel older. I just felt more real. There was no cake, no photos taken, no candles blown out, and yet for the first time in years, I felt celebrated not by others, by myself. The letter went out on a Monday. I folded the manuscript pages neatly, tied them with a blue ribbon, and placed them inside a manila envelope addressed to the Regional Archive Center. I didn't include a request for publication. I asked only that it be kept filed, remembered. The story was not for recognition. It was for record for the woman I once was, for the girl Lily would someday become, and for any stranger who might someday need to know that a quiet life still mattered, that a voice no one asked for still carried weight. A few weeks later, I received a response from the library. A soft-voiced woman named Clara Ara left a message on my landline. She thanked me for the submission and said they had reviewed it. She mentioned a new program, a community initiative, featuring voices of those overlooked or erased by family systems. She wanted to include my words as part of a special collection titled Stories That Stayed Quiet. I called back, gave consent, and that was all. Leah brought flowers the day we got the news, wild ones from the coastal path. We placed them in a chipped glass vase on the windowsill and watched the waves turn silver in the afternoon light. We didn't toast, we didn't cheer, we just sat with it. A moment that asked for nothing but to be witnessed. In the evenings now, I write a little more, not always about the past, sometimes just about the way the sea changes color at dusk or the sound of seagulls when the sky clears. Life has become smaller, quieter, but no less meaningful. There is no grand ending, no dramatic closure, only the truth. I was left behind. Then I left quietly, and in that silence, I built something that could not be taken. If this story found its way to the quiet places in your heart, I hope it reminded you that you are not alone, that your voice matters even when no one's listening. If you've ever felt forgotten, pushed aside, or silenced, this space is for you. You can leave a thought, a name, or nothing at all. Sometimes simply knowing someone else understands is enough.